On July 16, 1945, President Harry Truman was in Potsdam, Germany. Potsdam was a damaged city near Berlin, surrounded by the destruction left behind by World War II. Truman was staying in a small villa that Americans called the Little White House. From there, he was helping plan what would happen after the war in Europe had ended. That morning, Truman received a secret message from Washington, D.C. The message was written in code. It was very short, but Truman immediately understood what it meant. The message said that an operation had taken place and that the results looked good, even though all the details were not yet complete. Truman knew exactly what this code referred to. It meant that the United States had successfully tested an atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert. The test, known later as the Trinity test, showed that the bomb worked. For the first time in history, human beings had created a weapon powerful enough to destroy an entire city with a single explosion. This changed everything. The United States now had the most powerful weapon the world had ever seen. Truman realized that this bomb could be used to force Japan to surrender without a full invasion. An invasion of Japan was expected to cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. The atomic bomb seemed like a way to end the war quickly. However, very few people knew about this weapon. Even many top military leaders had not been told. One of those people was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower had been the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe and was one of the most respected generals in the world. He had led the D-Day invasion and helped defeat Nazi Germany. At Potsdam, Eisenhower was serving as an advisor to the president. But Eisenhower knew nothing about the Manhattan Project, the secret program that built the atomic bomb. While Eisenhower had been planning traditional military strategies, troop movements, invasions, and battles, scientists in New Mexico had been working on a weapon that could make all of that unnecessary. Conventional warfare, as Eisenhower understood it, was about to be changed forever. Truman decided that it was time to tell Eisenhower the truth. A few days after receiving the coded message, Truman asked Eisenhower to speak with him privately. No reporters were present, no official records were made. What happened in that conversation would stay with both men for the rest of their lives. Truman explained that the United States had developed a new bomb of unbelievable power. He told Eisenhower that it could destroy an entire city and possibly end the war with Japan very quickly. Then Truman asked Eisenhower what he thought should be done. Eisenhower's response surprised and troubled Truman. Eisenhower told him that he believed the bomb should not be used. He argued that Japan was already close to surrender and that using such a devastating weapon was unnecessary. He also worried about the moral consequences of killing so many civilians at once. Eisenhower believed that using the bomb would harm America's reputation and set a dangerous example for the future. This answer was not what Truman wanted to hear. Truman believed the bomb could save American lives by avoiding a costly invasion. He also felt pressure to end the war as quickly as possible. Despite Eisenhower's warning, Truman would later authorize the use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing roughly 200,000 Japanese civilians. This moment revealed a deep moral divide between the two men. Both Truman and Eisenhower would later become presidents of the United States, but they saw the bomb very differently. Eisenhower, the general who had planned the largest invasion in history, tried to stop the use of the most destructive weapon ever created. Truman, the civilian leader, believed it was necessary. To understand how the world reached this point, we must go back a few years earlier. The Manhattan Project began in 1942 during World War II. Its goal was to build an atomic bomb before Nazi Germany could do so. The project was massive and secret. It cost about $2 billion and employed more than 130,000 people. Scientists, engineers, and workers were spread across hidden facilities in places like Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Hanford. It was the most tightly guarded secret of the war. Most of the people working on it did not even know what they were building. And yet, by July 1945, their work had changed the course of history forever.
The secrecy around the atomic bomb was extreme. Almost no one outside a very small circle knew it existed. Even Vice President Harry Truman was not told about it. For months, he attended meetings and performed his duties without any idea that the United States was spending billions of dollars on the most powerful weapon ever created. Everything changed on April 12, 1945, when President Franklin D. Roosevelt suddenly died. Truman became president that same day. Shortly afterward, Secretary of War Henry Stimson met with Truman and told him about the Manhattan Project for the first time. Truman was stunned. He could not believe that as vice president he had been completely kept in the dark about such an enormous and important weapons program. The secrecy did not stop with Truman. Many of the most powerful military leaders in the country also knew nothing about the atomic bomb. General Douglas MacArthur, who was commanding American forces in the Pacific, had not been told. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the head of the U.S. Navy in the Pacific, did not know either. And General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of Allied forces in Europe, was also unaware of the project. At the time, Eisenhower had just finished leading the Allies to victory in Europe. Germany officially surrendered on May 8, 1945. Eisenhower had planned and directed some of the most important military operations of the entire war. He oversaw the D-Day invasion, the liberation of France, and the final advance into Germany. Because of these achievements, he was widely seen as the most successful and famous general in the world. Yet even Eisenhower did not know that while he was fighting across Europe, scientists and engineers in the United States were secretly building a weapon that could destroy an entire city in a single moment. If it had been ready earlier, this weapon might have made much of the long and brutal fighting unnecessary. In July 1945, world leaders gathered in Potsdam, a city outside Berlin, to decide what would happen after the war. President Truman attended, along with British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Truman brought Eisenhower with him to serve as a military advisor. By this point, the war in Europe was over, but the war in the Pacific continued. Japan had not surrendered. The main question at Potsdam was how to end the war with Japan as quickly as possible. American military planners were preparing for Operation Downfall, a full invasion of the Japanese home islands. The plan was massive and dangerous. U.S. forces would land on the island of Kyushu in November 1945. Then, in March 1946, they would invade the main island of Honshu, where Tokyo was located. Military leaders believed this invasion would be incredibly costly. They estimated that hundreds of thousands of American soldiers could be killed or wounded. On the Japanese side, casualties could reach into the millions. Everyone was deeply concerned about the human cost. The recent Battle of Okinawa showed just how brutal such an invasion might be. The fighting there had been savage. Japanese soldiers fought almost to the last man. Many civilians, fearing capture or believing surrender was dishonorable, chose to take their own lives instead. Okinawa was a terrifying preview of what an invasion of Japan itself might look like. But now, Truman had another option. The atomic bomb offered a possible way to end the war without sending American troops onto Japanese soil. On July 16, 1945, the first atomic bomb was tested in the New Mexico desert. The test, known as the Trinity test, was more successful than anyone had expected. The bomb worked. Its explosion was equal to about 20,000 tons of TNT. It created a massive fireball and shockwave. Scientists realized that a single bomb like this could completely destroy a large city. When Truman learned of the successful test, he was excited and relieved. He believed this weapon could save countless American lives by avoiding an invasion. He believed it could force Japan to surrender quickly. He also saw another advantage. Using the bomb would show Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union that the United States possessed overwhelming power. To Truman, the atomic bomb seemed like an answer to several problems at once. It could end the war, reduce American casualties, and strengthen America's position in the post-war world. At that moment, Truman saw the bomb not just as a weapon, but as a solution. Even though Truman was excited about the atomic bomb, he did not want to make the decision alone. He wanted military advice. He wanted to know what his top generals thought. Was it really necessary to use this weapon on Japanese cities? Would it help end the war, or was it going too far? Around July 20th, 1945, Secretary of War Henry Stimson finally told General Dwight D. Eisenhower about the atomic bomb. The exact day is not known, but the meeting happened in Potsdam. Stimson explained the Manhattan Project, described the successful test in New Mexico, and told Eisenhower that the bomb would likely be used against Japan very soon. Eisenhower's reaction was strong and immediate. He did not feel excitement or pride. Instead, he felt deeply troubled. Later in his life, Eisenhower spoke about this moment many times, in his memoirs and in interviews. His story never changed. When Stimson told him about the bomb, Eisenhower said he felt depressed. He told Stimson that Japan was already beaten and that using the atomic bomb was not necessary. In Eisenhower's view, the war could be won without it. A few days later, President Truman himself spoke privately with Eisenhower about the bomb. This conversation took place at the Little White House in Potsdam. No one else was in the room, so only Truman and Eisenhower knew exactly what was said. Years later, Eisenhower described the conversation clearly. He said that he told Truman he had serious doubts about using the bomb. First, he believed Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb would not change the final outcome. Second, he believed the United States should not shock the world by using such a terrible weapon when it was no longer needed to save American lives. This was an extraordinary thing for Eisenhower to say. He was a career military officer who had planned massive invasions and accepted the brutal realities of war. Yet here he was telling the president that using the atomic bomb would be both militarily unnecessary and morally wrong. Eisenhower argued that other methods were already working. The U.S. naval blockade was choking Japan's supplies. American bombers were destroying Japanese cities using conventional weapons. Japan's ability to fight was collapsing. Eisenhower also believed that once the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan, Japan would have no choice but to surrender. Eisenhower's position was based on several reasons. First, from a military standpoint, he believed Japan could not continue the war for much longer. The Japanese Navy had been largely destroyed. The Air Force was badly damaged. The home islands were under constant attack. Food and fuel were running out, and the Soviet Union was preparing to attack Japan from the north. Second, Eisenhower was thinking about the future. He worried about what it would mean if the United States used atomic weapons. If America showed the world that this kind of weapon was acceptable, other countries would try to build their own. Eisenhower feared this could start a dangerous arms race. He understood that atomic weapons were far more destructive than anything seen before. He believed that opening the door to their use could eventually lead to weapons powerful enough to destroy entire nations or even civilization itself. For Eisenhower, the atomic bomb was not just a military tool. It was a moral line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed.
There was another reason Eisenhower opposed using the atomic bomb: moral concerns. He had just spent many months in Europe and had seen the terrible cost of war with his own eyes. He had walked through ruined cities and seen civilians left homeless. He had witnessed hunger, fear, and mass suffering. All of this stayed with him. Because of that experience, the idea of destroying an entire Japanese city with a single bomb deeply troubled Eisenhower. Yes, he knew that American forces were already bombing Japanese cities with conventional weapons, but to him, the atomic bomb felt different. This was not weeks of bombing or many separate attacks. This was one weapon that could kill tens of thousands, possibly more than 100,000 people in a single instant. That crossed a moral line for him. During his private conversation with President Truman, Eisenhower shared these concerns.
He did not raise his voice or argue aggressively. That was not his style. Eisenhower was calm, respectful, and direct. Truman had asked for his opinion, and Eisenhower gave it honestly. Truman did not react well. Eisenhower later said that the president was clearly upset by his opposition. Truman did not want to hear arguments against using the bomb. In his mind, the decision was already made. He believed the bomb should be used, and he did not appreciate a general questioning that choice. Truman saw the situation very differently from Eisenhower. His main concern was saving American lives. Military planners had warned that invading Japan could result in 500,000 American casualties, or even more. If the atomic bomb could prevent such an invasion, Truman believed using it was justified. Truman also wanted to end the war as fast as possible. Every day the war continued, people were dying. American sailors were being killed by kamikaze attacks. Prisoners of war were suffering in brutal Japanese camps. Allied bombing raids were killing Japanese civilians. To Truman, if one terrible action could quickly stop all of this suffering, it made sense to take it. There were also political reasons behind Truman's thinking. The Manhattan Project had cost about $2 billion, an enormous amount of money at the time. If Truman ended the war without using the bomb, and the public later learned that such a weapon existed, many Americans would ask painful questions. They would ask why their sons had died in battle when a weapon was available that might have saved them. Truman feared he would be destroyed politically for not using it. Finally, there was the issue of the Soviet Union. Truman was increasingly worried about Joseph Stalin. Although the United States and the Soviet Union had been allies during the war, tensions were already growing. Disagreements over Poland, Germany, and Eastern Europe were creating distrust. Truman believed having a weapon the Soviets did not yet possess gave the United States a powerful advantage. Using the atomic bomb would send a clear message to Stalin. America had unmatched military power. It would show that the United States could do things no other nation could. Because of all these reasons, Truman was not open to Eisenhower's objections. The president had made up his mind. Eisenhower's moral concerns, no matter how sincerely they were expressed, were not enough to change the course of history.
The conversation between Truman and Eisenhower ended without agreement. Eisenhower had clearly explained his position. Truman had listened, but he was not convinced. In the end, the decision did not belong to the generals. It belonged to the president. Eisenhower's job was to give advice when asked, and he had done that. Now Truman would act according to his own judgment. On July 26, 1945, the Allies issued the Potsdam Declaration. It demanded that Japan surrender unconditionally. The statement warned that if Japan refused, it would face prompt and utter destruction. The declaration did not directly mention the atomic bomb, but Truman and his advisors knew exactly what that warning meant. Japan did not surrender. The Japanese government was deeply divided. Some leaders believed they should accept the declaration and end the war. Others wanted to keep fighting, hoping to negotiate better terms. Because of these disagreements, the government could not reach a clear decision. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber called the Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. The explosion instantly killed about 70,000 people. Tens of thousands more later died from burns, injuries, and radiation sickness. In the weeks and months that followed, Hiroshima was largely destroyed. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb, this time on the city of Nagasaki. About 40,000 people were killed instantly. On that same day, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Japanese-controlled territory in Manchuria. These events finally forced Japan to act. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito spoke to the Japanese people and announced Japan's surrender. World War II was over. Eisenhower learned about the bombing of Hiroshima while he was still in Europe. His reaction was not one of celebration. He felt that his fears had been confirmed, but he took no pride in being right.
He believed the atomic bomb had not been necessary and that Japan would have surrendered anyway, especially after the Soviet Union entered the war. In the years that followed, Eisenhower spoke openly about his opposition to using the atomic bomb. In a 1963 interview with Newsweek, he said that the Japanese were already ready to surrender and that it was not necessary to hit them with such a terrible weapon. He held this belief for the rest of his life and never changed his position. Truman, on the other hand, never expressed regret. He believed he had made the correct decision. In his view, the atomic bomb saved lives by preventing a costly invasion of Japan. When critics challenged his choice, Truman defended it strongly. He remained firm in his belief that using the bomb was justified and necessary. In the end, the two men stood on opposite sides of history, both convinced they were right and both carrying the weight of a decision that changed the world forever. The disagreement between Truman and Eisenhower over the atomic bomb shows that they saw the world in very different ways. Truman was a practical decision-maker. He focused on results. To him, the most important goal was ending the war and saving American lives. If using the atomic bomb could prevent a deadly invasion of Japan, then he believed it was the right choice, even if it raised serious moral questions. Eisenhower thought differently. He was deeply concerned about the moral side of the decision. He worried about the example it would set for the future. He feared that using such a powerful weapon would change how wars were fought and make mass destruction more acceptable. He also cared deeply about the human cost, including the suffering of enemy civilians. Eisenhower believed that some actions should not be taken, even if they might be effective from a military standpoint. Neither man can be easily labeled as right or wrong. The decision to use the atomic bomb remains one of the most debated and controversial choices in American history. Historians still argue about whether it was truly necessary, whether Japan was already close to surrender, and whether other options could have been tried first. What is clear is that when Truman asked Eisenhower for his opinion, Eisenhower answered honestly. He said the bomb was not needed, and that using it would be a mistake. He warned about the moral consequences and the dangerous precedent it would set. He spoke based on both his military experience and his conscience. Truman listened, but he disagreed. He went ahead with the decision and never expressed regret. From his point of view, the war ended, American soldiers came home, and Japan surrendered without an invasion. To Truman, those results proved that his decision was justified. The ends, in his mind, justified the means. Still, Eisenhower's words did not disappear. The memory of that conversation in Potsdam stayed with both men. Years later, after both had served as president, each still remembered it. Truman remembered a general challenging his judgment. Eisenhower remembered a president refusing to listen to his moral concerns. There's an important irony in Eisenhower's later career. Even though he opposed using the atomic bomb in 1945, he greatly expanded America's nuclear arsenal when he became president. He relied on nuclear weapons as a deterrent, believing that their existence could prevent future wars. He even threatened to use nuclear weapons during the Korean War and other international crises. This does not necessarily make Eisenhower a hypocrite. His position was consistent. He opposed using atomic weapons against a defeated enemy that was already close to surrender, but he believed in keeping nuclear weapons as a defensive tool, meant to discourage aggression and prevent war. To Eisenhower, there was a clear difference between dropping atomic bombs on cities and possessing nuclear weapons to maintain peace. That distinction explains his actions and highlights how deeply that moment in 1945 shaped his thinking for the rest of his life.
After the war, President Truman had to live with his decision for the rest of his life. He never said that he regretted using the atomic bomb. In public, he always defended his choice. However, people who knew him well said that the weight of the decision stayed with him. Ordering the deaths of more than 100,000 people in a single moment is not something any human being can carry easily, even if they believe it was necessary to end a war.
The private conversation between Truman and Eisenhower at Potsdam stands out as a powerful moment in history. It was the moment when the man who would authorize the use of the atomic bomb spoke face to face with the man who believed it should never be used. Both men would later become President of the United States. One made the most consequential military decision of World War II, the other warned against it. Eisenhower's message to Truman was clear and direct. He believed Japan was already defeated. He believed the war could end without using such a devastating weapon. To him, dropping the atomic bomb was unnecessary and morally wrong. His advice was simple but serious: do not use it. Truman chose not to follow that advice. He believed the bomb would end the war quickly and save American lives. Whether he was right or wrong is a question that historians, scholars, and the public continue to debate. There is no single answer that everyone agrees on, and there may never be one. What is certain is that this moment changed the world forever. The use of the atomic bomb introduced a new kind of warfare, one capable of destroying entire cities in seconds. It reshaped global politics, military strategy, and the way humanity thinks about war and peace. The story told here is based on historical records, including Eisenhower's memoirs, Truman's papers, accounts from Secretary of War Henry Stimson, and decades of scholarly research. Historians do not all agree on every detail or interpretation. Readers and viewers are encouraged to explore multiple sources and perspectives when studying this period. This account is intended for educational purposes, to help people better understand one of the most important and difficult decisions in modern history and the human debate behind it.